The candles flickered in the cold English wind that swept through the church courtyard. Father Thomas stood before the statue of the Virgin Mary, his face twisted in rage. His finger pointed at a young mother who trembled before him. Sarah held her son close. The boy was only 7 years old, his eyes wide with fear. The congregation watched in silence. Some looked away in shame. Others whispered among themselves. Before you hear what happened next, please subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button. And comment with your city or country below. This story will shake you to your core. It will make you question everything you thought you knew about faith and judgment. Father Thomas had been the priest of St. Margaret's Church for 15 years. He was known for his strict interpretations, his harsh sermons, his unforgiving nature. But what he did that day crossed every line. Sarah was a widow. Her husband had died 2 years earlier in a car accident. She worked 2 jobs to support her son Michael. She cleaned offices at night. She worked at a bakery during the day. She barely had time to sleep. But she never missed Sunday Mass. She believed in God. She believed in redemption. She believed that the church was a place of sanctuary. That day she learned how wrong she could be. The statue of Mary seemed to watch everything. Her hands clasped in prayer. Her face serene and compassionate. A stark contrast to the cruelty unfolding before her. The morning had started like any other Sunday in the small English town of Ashford. Sarah woke at 6 in the morning. She prepared breakfast for Michael. Toast with butter. Scrambled eggs. Orange juice. The boy ate slowly, his mind already wandering to the cartoons he wished he could watch. But Sunday was church day. It had always been church day. Sarah's mother had taken her to church every Sunday. Now she did the same with Michael. It was tradition. It was faith. It was connection to something greater than herself. They walked the 15 minutes to St. Margaret's Church. The old stone building stood at the center of town, its spire reaching toward the gray English sky. The bells rang out calling the faithful. Sarah held Michael's hand. She wore her best dress. A simple blue cotton dress she had bought at a charity shop. It was clean. It was modest. It was all she could afford. Michael wore his school uniform. His only decent clothes. His shoes were worn. The soles almost through. But Sarah had polished them that morning. They looked presentable. Inside the church the familiar smell of incense and old wood greeted them. They took their usual spot in the third pew from the back. Not too close to the front where Father Thomas might notice them. Not too far back where it seemed they didn't care. Just right in the middle, where they could be part of the congregation without drawing attention. But that day everything would change. Father Thomas had noticed something. Something that had been building his anger for weeks. Something that would explode into a confrontation that no one would forget. The Mass began normally enough. The hymns were sung. The prayers recited. The gospel read. But during his sermon Father Thomas's eyes kept returning to Sarah. His words grew sharper. His tone more accusatory. He spoke of sin. Of poverty as punishment. Of the undeserving poor. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. She knew he was talking about her. Father Thomas's voice echoed through the stone walls of St. Margaret's Church. He stood at the pulpit. His vestments rich and ornate. Red and gold. Symbols of authority and power. His hands gripped the edges of the lectern. His knuckles white with the force of his grip. The sermon had taken a dark turn. What started as a reflection on the gospel reading had become something else entirely. A judgment. A condemnation. A personal attack disguised as spiritual guidance. He spoke of those who came to church with their hands out. Those who took from the collection plate more than they gave. Those who expected charity without showing proper gratitude or deference. Sarah felt every word like a physical blow. She had asked the church for help 3 weeks earlier. Michael needed new shoes for school. His old ones had holes. His feet got wet when it rained. He was getting sick. Sarah had swallowed her pride. She had knocked on the door of the rectory. She had explained her situation to Father Thomas. He had looked at her with cold eyes. He had asked her about her husband. About why God had taken him. About what sins might have led to such punishment. Sarah had left without the help she needed. But she had found the money somehow. She always did. She took an extra shift at the bakery. She went without lunch for a week. She bought Michael the shoes. But the memory of Father Thomas's judgment burned in her heart. Now as he preached she realized he had not forgotten either. His words grew more specific. He spoke of a widow in the congregation. A woman who claimed to be faithful but was seen at the pub last Thursday night. Sarah's breath caught. She had gone to the pub. But only because the bakery owner had invited all the staff for his birthday. She had stayed for one orange juice. She had left after 30 minutes. She had to get home to Michael. But someone had seen her. Someone had told Father Thomas. And now he was using it against her. The congregation began to turn. Head swiveling. Eyes searching. Looking for the widow he described. Sarah felt Michael press closer to her. The boy sensed something was wrong. She put her arm around him. Tried to shield him from the stares. Father Thomas descended from the pulpit. This was unusual. Normally he stayed elevated, above the congregation. But now he walked down the aisle. His eyes fixed on Sarah. She wanted to run. But her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen. Trapped by shame and fear and disbelief. He stopped at her pew. The entire church fell silent. Even the sound of breathing seemed to stop. Sarah. He said her name loudly. His voice filled with contempt. Stand up. She didn't move. Stand up when I address you. Slowly she stood. Her legs shaking. Michael clutched at her hand. Father Thomas pointed at her. This woman comes to our church every Sunday. She sits in our pews. She takes communion. She asked for our charity. But does she live according to God's laws? Does she set a proper example for her son? No. She goes to pubs. She neglects her duties. She dresses in rags and expects us to feel sorry for her. The words cut deep. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. But she blinked them back. She would not give him the satisfaction. Father, I came to the pub for 30 minutes for a colleague's birthday. I had one juice. I left early to care for my son. Her voice was quiet but steady. Excuses. Father Thomas spat the word. Always excuses from people like you. People who refuse to take responsibility. People who blame their circumstances instead of examining their own failings. Your husband is dead. God rest his soul. But perhaps you should ask yourself why God took him from you. What lessons you were meant to learn. The congregation gasped. This was too far. Even for Father Thomas. Sarah felt her world tilt. The cruelty of his words took her breath away. Michael began to cry. He didn't understand everything that was being said. But he knew his father was being insulted. He knew his mother was being hurt. Sarah pulled him close. She looked Father Thomas in the eye. My husband was a good man. He died in an accident. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't a lesson. It was a tragedy. And I come to this church because I believe in God's mercy. Not in the judgment of men who have never known hunger or fear or loss. Her voice had grown stronger. The tears were gone now. Replaced by something else. Dignity. Courage. Truth. Father Thomas's face turned red. How dare you speak to me that way in God's house? How dare you question my authority? Get out. Take your child and leave this church. You are not welcome here until you learn humility and repentance. Sarah stood still for a moment. She looked around at the congregation. Some looked ashamed. Some looked angry. But no one spoke. No one defended her. She took Michael's hand. She walked down the aisle toward the door. Her head held high. As she passed the statue of the Virgin Mary near the entrance, she paused. She looked up at Mary's face. The face of a mother who had watched her own son suffer. The face of compassion and understanding. Sarah whispered a prayer. Not to be vindicated. Not for revenge. But for strength. For her son. For herself. For the ability to forgive even this. The week that followed was the darkest of Sarah's life. The story of what happened at St. Margaret's spread through Ashford like wildfire. Small towns have long memories and quick tongues. At the bakery, customers whispered. Some stopped coming when they saw Sarah behind the counter. The owner called her into his office on Wednesday. Sarah, I have to let you go. The words hit her like a punch. He couldn't meet her eyes. Some of the customers have complained. They say they don't feel comfortable. I'm sorry. I have to think of the business. Sarah nodded. She understood. She didn't argue. She simply took off her apron, collected her final pay, and walked out into the gray afternoon. Michael was having trouble at school. Other children had heard their parents talking. They taunted him at recess. They said his mother was a sinner. They said his father had been punished by God. The teachers did nothing. They looked the other way. Michael came home with bruises. Not from fighting, but from falling down when he ran away from the other children. Sarah held him while he cried. She told him none of it was true. She told him God loved them. But the words felt hollow. How could she believe in a God whose representative had shown such cruelty? How could she have faith in a church that rejected her? At night she lay awake. The bills piled up on the kitchen table. Rent was due in 2 weeks. She had no job, no savings, no family to turn to. Her parents had died years ago. Her husband's family had blamed her for his death, said she had distracted him, made him careless. They wanted nothing to do with her or Michael. She was alone. But she was not broken. Not yet. On Thursday afternoon there was a knock at her door. Sarah opened it to find an elderly woman, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. She lived 3 streets over. She had been at the church that Sunday. "I've been thinking about what happened," Mrs. Whitmore said without preamble. "I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing your face. The way you held your boy. The way Father Thomas spoke to you. It was wrong." Sarah invited her in. They sat at the small kitchen table. Mrs. Whitmore was 82 years old. She had been a member of St. Margaret's for 60 years. "I've seen many priests come and go," she said slowly. "Most were good men. Flawed like all of us, but trying to do right. Father Thomas is different. He came to us 15 years ago. At first he seemed devout, dedicated, but over time something changed. He became harder, more judgmental, more concerned with rules than with people." She paused, sipped the tea Sarah had made. "I've heard whispers over the years. People he's turned away, families he's judged. But no one speaks up. We're all too afraid." "Afraid of what?" Sarah asked. "Of being cast out like you. Of losing our place in the community. Of going to hell." Mrs. Whitmore laughed bitterly at the last one. "As if God would send us to hell for standing up against cruelty. But fear is a powerful thing. It makes cowards of us all." The 2 women talked for hours. Mrs. Whitmore told stories. Of others Father Thomas had humiliated. A teenage girl pregnant out of wedlock. A man who had lost his job and couldn't tithe. An elderly couple who questioned his expensive renovations to the rectory while the church roof leaked. All of them had been driven away. All of them had suffered in silence. "Something has to be done," Mrs. Whitmore said finally. "But I'm too old, too tired. People don't listen to me anymore. They think I'm senile. But you're young. You're strong. You stood up to him in front of everyone. You could be the one to change things." Sarah shook her head. "I have no power. No influence. I just lost my job. I'm about to lose my home. I can't fight him." "You already have." Mrs. Whitmore reached across the table, took Sarah's hand. "Just by standing there with dignity, by refusing to be crushed, you've already won a small victory. But there could be more, if you're willing." "What do you mean?" "There's going to be a meeting. The bishop is coming next month for his annual visit. People can bring concerns, complaints. It's rare anyone does. But this time there needs to be testimony about what Father Thomas has done, not just to you, but to others. Will you speak?" Sarah thought about it. She thought about Michael, about the fear in his eyes, about the bruises on his knees. She thought about her husband, about what he would want. He had been a kind man, a gentle man. He had believed in standing up for what was right. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "Yes, I'll speak." Mrs. Whitmore smiled. It was a sad smile, a knowing smile. "Good. Because you won't be alone. I've already spoken to 7 other families. People Father Thomas has heard over the years. They're all willing to testify. If you'll stand with us." Sarah felt something stir in her chest. Something that had been dormant for weeks. Oh. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Whitmore proved to be a woman of formidable organization despite her age. She gathered testimonies. She documented incidents. She compiled a dossier of Father Thomas's behavior over the past 15 years. Sarah found work cleaning houses. It didn't pay as well as the bakery, but it was enough to keep food on the table. Michael's situation at school improved slightly. One of his teachers, Mrs. Roberts, had heard about what happened. She began to watch him more carefully. She stopped the bullying when she saw it. It wasn't much, but it was something. On the Saturday before the bishop's visit, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Father Michael O'Brien. He was younger than Father Thomas, perhaps 40 years old. He served at St. Peter's in the next town over. He had heard about what happened. "May I come in?" Sarah hesitated, but something in his kind eyes made her step aside. They sat in the small living room. Michael was at a friend's house, one of the few friends who had stood by him. "I want you to know that not all priests are like Father Thomas," Father O'Brien began. "I want you to know that what he did was wrong. Not just inappropriate, but wrong. Sinful even." Sarah said nothing. Father O'Brien continued. "I've known Thomas for 10 years. We were at seminary together. He was always ambitious, always certain of his righteousness, but he was also passionate about faith. I thought that passion would mellow into wisdom. Instead it curdled into judgment." He paused. The church is supposed to be a refuge, a place of mercy, a place where the broken can find healing. What Thomas did, what he said to you, that isn't the church. That isn't God. That's just one flawed man letting his power corrupt him. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because tomorrow you're going to speak to the bishop. And you need to know that you have support. Not just from Mrs. Whitmore and the others, but from those of us within the church who believe it must be better, must do better. I'll be there tomorrow. I've submitted my own testimony about Thomas's behavior, about complaints I've heard from people in my own parish who left St. Margaret's. You're not alone in this. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time in weeks. Tears of gratitude rather than pain. Thank you. Father O'Brien stood to leave. At the door he turned back. The Virgin Mary was a mother. She watched her son be condemned by religious authorities. She watched him suffer for speaking truth. You're in good company. The next day dawned cold and clear. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. In the church hall. Not in the sanctuary itself. Sarah dressed carefully. Her blue dress. Clean and pressed. Michael stayed with Mrs. Whitmore. This was not something for a child to witness. Sarah arrived early. The hall was already filling. She saw familiar faces. Some sympathetic. Some hostile. Some merely curious. Mrs. Whitmore sat in the front row. She had saved a seat for Sarah. The bishop arrived at precisely 2 o'clock. Bishop James Thornton was a tall man in his 60s. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for protecting the institutional church. Father Thomas sat beside him, looking confident, almost smug. The bishop opened with a prayer. Then he explained the process. Anyone with concerns could speak. They would be heard. They would be investigated. Justice would be done. Mrs. Whitmore stood first. She spoke clearly despite her age. She detailed incident after incident. The pregnant girl who was called a harlot from the pulpit. The unemployed man refused assistance. The couple driven away when they questioned finances. 3 others followed. Each with their own story. Each with their own pain. Father Thomas sat unmoved. His face a mask. Then Sarah stood. Her legs trembled. But her voice did not. She told her story. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. But with simple truth. She spoke of her husband's death. Of her struggle to care for Michael. Of her request for help. Of the judgment she received instead of mercy. She spoke of the sermon. Of being called out before the congregation. Of Father Thomas's cruel words about her husband. Of being expelled from the church. She spoke of the consequences. The lost job. The harassment. The fear in her son's eyes. When she finished there was silence. Then Father Thomas stood. These are lies, he said firmly. This woman is bitter. She's resentful. She wants money from the church. She's trying to destroy my reputation because I dared to hold her accountable for her sin. Before Sarah could respond, something extraordinary happened. One by one, people began to stand. First 10, then 20, then 40. More than half the congregation. They stood in silence, a silent testimony. They had witnessed what happened. They knew it was true. The bishop's face grew grave. He looked at Father Thomas. Is it true that you called this woman out during Mass? That you made personal accusations about her character? That you suggested her husband's death was divine punishment? I was trying to teach a lesson about. Father Thomas began. Is it true? The bishop's voice was sharp. Father Thomas's confidence faltered. Yes, but she needed to hear. The bishop closed his eyes. When he opened them they were filled with sadness. Father Thomas, you are suspended from your duties effective immediately. There will be a full investigation. You will not perform Mass. You will not hear confessions. You will not represent this diocese in any capacity, until we determine what course of action to take. Father Thomas's face went white. You can't. This is my church. This isn't your church. The bishop said quietly. This is God's church, and you have forgotten what that means. The bishop turned to Sarah. I cannot undo what was done to you. I cannot erase the pain you've suffered. But I can tell you this. You are welcome in any Catholic church in this diocese. You and your son. And I personally apologize for the failure of the church to protect you, to support you, to be what it should have been. Sarah felt the tears come now. She let them fall. 3 months later Sarah stood again before the statue of the Virgin Mary. But this time it was different. Michael held her hand. They had returned to St. Margaret's. Father Thomas was gone. Permanently removed from ministry. The investigation had uncovered even more. Financial irregularities. Other cases of emotional abuse. A pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. A new priest had arrived. Father David Chin. Young and energetic. He had started by apologizing. To the whole congregation. For the hurt that had been caused. For the failures of the church. Then he had done something remarkable. He had asked Sarah to help. To be part of a new parish council. To help rebuild what had been broken. Sarah had accepted. Not because she had forgiven everything. Not because the pain was gone. But because she believed, still believed, in something greater than one man's cruelty. In mercy. In redemption. In the possibility of healing. She looked up at Mary's face. The serene expression. The compassionate eyes. And she understood now. Mary had watched all along. Mary had known. And in her own way, Mary had acted. Through Mrs. Whitmore. Through Father O'Brien. Through the courage of ordinary people. Who stood up when it mattered. Michael tugged her hand. Mom, can we light a candle for Dad? Sarah smiled. Yes, love. We can. They walked together to the prayer candles. Sarah struck a match. Michael carefully lit the small white candle. They stood in silence. Mother and son. In God's house. Finally home.